Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to explore this really fascinating kind of hidden collision between blockbuster science fiction and actual evolutionary biology.
Yeah, we're using a surprisingly insightful critique published in Psychology Today by Dr. Glenn Geher. He's an evolutionary psychology professor, and he brings up some wild points.
He really does. But to get to the core of his argument, we first need to talk about a phenomenon you have probably experienced yourself. When you pick up a piece of hard science fiction, you generally have this comforting expectation of absolute precision, right?
Oh, absolutely. You expect the physics to be just completely airtight, like the orbital mechanics, the thrust-to-weight ratios of the spacecraft, atmospheric pressure.
Exactly. You expect the author to have calculated it all out like a literal NASA engineering schematic.
Because the appeal of that specific genre is really the binary nature of the universe it presents. I mean, the math either works and the astronauts survive, or the math is off by like a fraction of a decimal and the ship burns up on re-entry.
It's very clean. And authors who actually do the work earn a lot of trust from their readers. Which brings us to today's focus. We are looking at Andy Weir's wildly popular sci-fi novel, Project Hail Mary.
Right, and as a listener diving into this with us, you probably already appreciate getting the facts straight without drowning in jargon. So you likely know that Weir, the same guy who wrote The Martian, is legendary for his scientific accuracy.
He is the guy who does the math. But, when you step out of the realm of physics and into the messy, organic world of evolutionary biology, that comforting precision sometimes just vanishes.
It really does. The math for the spaceship might be perfect, but what happens when an author gets the underlying biology fundamentally wrong?
And that tension is really the foundation of Dr. Geher's critique. He points out that while Project Hail Mary is this dazzling, science-heavy narrative, which is soon to be a major movie, by the way, it actually trips over a massive biological misunderstanding.
Yeah, biologists actually refer to this specific misunderstanding as the naive species selection fallacy.
The naive species selection fallacy. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can look at what a blockbuster novel gets wrong, we need to make sure we understand the mechanics of how evolution actually operates.
Right. Well, when you hear the word evolution, the image that flashes in most of our minds is this grand, epic battle for planetary dominance.
Like, we picture life as a giant turf war between different categories of animals.
Exactly. And that pervasive image totally masks the true battleground. So the term naive species selection fallacy was coined by the renowned evolutionary biologist David Sloan Wilson.
Which describes what, exactly?
It describes the mistaken belief that natural selection is a competition between different species. People tend to visualize evolution as a process that favors one species over another, like it's a bracketed tournament of lions competing against dandelions.
Or, I don't know, barracudas battling it out against New York sugar magnolia trees for ultimate survival.
Right. The imagery is compelling, but it is completely scientifically backwards. It creates this illusion of an interspecies war when, in reality, the mechanism of evolution just does not operate on a species-wide level.
So the popular myth treats evolution almost like a team sport. Like species A is out there on the field playing against species B, and the goal is for your team to win the championship.
Yeah, that's the myth.
But looking at the biological reality here, you aren't really competing against the other team at all. You're competing against your own teammates for the MVP trophy.
That analogy perfectly captures the actual mechanism. I mean, in evolutionary biology, the adaptations we see in organisms, so the physical traits or behaviors that get passed down, are selected over time for one primary reason.
To help the individual, right?
Exactly. They give an individual organism a survival or reproductive advantage over other members of its own species. It's conspecifics. Richard Dawkins famously detailed this mechanism in his book, The Selfish Gene.
Right. The fierce competition for survival and reproduction happens almost entirely within a single gene pool.
The engine of evolution is driven by individual advantage, not species-level advantage.
And Geher provides some incredibly vivid examples in his article to illustrate this. These are the kinds of mechanisms that really stick with you because they reveal a rather brutal reality beneath nature's surface.
They really do. Like, let's look at emperor penguins.
Oh, this one blew my mind. Because we see documentaries showcasing them as these cooperative, highly social animals huddling together to survive the freezing Antarctic winds.
Right, and the huddling behavior certainly exists, but it is driven by individual thermal regulation. It's not a noble desire to keep the penguin species alive.
And when you look at their behavior at the edge of the ice, the whole illusion of a unified team just shatters.
Totally. When they're trying to figure out if a predator, like a leopard seal, is waiting in the freezing water below, they don't draw straws for the good of the colony.
No, they have evolved a behavior where they physically push their fellow penguins off the ice into the treacherous waters to test for predators.
They literally sacrifice their own teammate. They're using another member of their species as a biological probe.
It's wild. The mechanism is entirely self-serving.
Yeah, if the penguin in the water gets eaten, the others behind it on the ice know not to jump in, which preserves their own individual lives.
And if the pushed penguin survives, the others dive in to secure food for themselves. The adaptation here is self-preservation at the direct expense of a peer.
Exactly. Then you have the behavioral adaptations of lions. When a new alpha male lion takes over a pride by defeating the previous alpha, he doesn't step into a nurturing role to help the lion species thrive and multiply.
No, he immediately kills all the young cubs sired by the previous alpha male.
From a human moral standpoint, it is a horrific reality. But from the perspective of an evolutionary ledger, it is just simple math. Let's look at the gene frequencies for a second.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Imagine a genetic variant that makes a newly crowned alpha lion act like a benevolent stepfather, like he expends his energy to protect cubs that carry his rival's DNA.
He might spend his entire tenure defending those cubs, never passing on his own genes.
Right. And when he dies, his stepfather genes die with him.
Meanwhile, the ruthless lion who kills the cubs stops the females from nursing, which brings them back into heat sooner.
Yes, so he passes on his own genetic material. The genes coding for that ruthless behavior rapidly multiply in the gene pool, while the hypothetical genes for nurturing a rival's offspring just get out-reproduced and vanish.
It is a massive reproductive advantage for him as an individual, but it comes at a devastating cost to the broader species population numbers.
And the article points out this dynamic isn't just happening on the ice shelves or the savanna, it happens in human psychology too.
Right, like how heterosexual human men often experience violently jealous reactions at just the thought of a female partner having a sexual affair.
The underlying biological drive, there isn't some noble quest to ensure the human race populates the Earth.
It's about resource protection, isn't it?
Exactly. It is the individual male's biological drive to ensure he isn't expending his limited, hard-earned resources raising another man's genetic offspring. The psychological pain of jealousy is an evolved alarm system designed to protect individual genetic legacy.
Seeing these examples stacked up like that completely dismantles the myth. The idea that adaptations evolve with the primary purpose of advancing a species really is just a fairy tale.
A species is essentially just a byproduct. It is a category we invented to describe a collection of individual organisms that are all walking around packed full of adaptations designed to advance their own personal survival.
Now, seeing how ruthlessly individualistic evolution actually is, that single sentence on page 349 of Andy Weir's novel suddenly feels glaringly out of place.
Oh, it really does.
Let me quote the exact line from the book. There are two characters from very different backgrounds having a deep philosophical conversation about why human beings are so intelligent. And one character says, quote, "Intelligence evolves to give us an advantage over the other animals. We're the minimum intelligence needed to ensure we can dominate our planet," unquote.
The naive species selection fallacy laid bare right there on the page.
The core thesis of that dialogue is that human intelligence evolved specifically as an interspecies weapon so humanity could beat out the other animals and dominate the globe.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, wait a minute. If evolution isn't about the human species dominating the planet, then what exactly is the point of human intelligence?
Right. Why did we evolve these massive, complex brains if not to beat out the bears and the wolves and conquer our environment?
It is the most logical question to ask, especially because our dominance over the planet seems like the obvious result of our intelligence. But we have to separate the ultimate outcome from the biological mechanism that got us here.
The evolutionary forces that shaped human intelligence were never about winning a global chess match for team humanity.
No, it was about individual humans solving complex, immediate problems of survival and reproduction.
And to really understand this, we have to look at the massive biological cost of human intelligence. Like, the human brain makes up only about 2% of our total body weight, right?
That burns roughly 20% of our daily calories.
Which is crazy. Evolution is a ruthless accountant. It does not fund that kind of massive daily energy deficit for a vague, futuristic team trophy.
Exactly. The return on investment for carrying around a brain that burns that many calories had to yield massive, immediate personal advantages.
And Geher highlights three distinct perspectives from evolutionary researchers in his article that prove just how individualistic and competitive our intelligence really is.
Yeah, the first perspective comes from Jeffrey Miller's research, which was published back in the year 2000, and it focuses on sexual selection.
Which is fascinating, because I always assumed our intelligence primarily evolved around tool building to survive the elements, like figuring out how to chip flint or build a shelter.
Most people do assume that, but Miller's research takes it in a completely different direction. He provides compelling evidence that a massive driver of human cognitive complexity was actually the competition for mates.
So under his framework, our brains evolved to be hypercomplex so we could basically display our effectiveness.
Right. Things like our wit, our creativity, our expansive vocabularies, and even our ability to produce art, these act as fitness indicators.
They signal to potential mates that we possess high-quality, mutation-free genetics.
Exactly.
So human intelligence isn't an overarching planetary defense system. It's more like an evolutionary sports car.
Yeah.
It's a highly expensive, flashy adaptation designed to pull up to the genetic curb and impress a mate. We got smart to show off for personal genetic gain.
It is a highly individualistic competition. Then we look at the research of Bingham and Sousa from 2009. They argue that the core of human intelligence is inherently social.
Now see, social sounds suspiciously like it might be for the good of the species, like we evolved to band together, build communities, share resources.
I know, on the surface, human cooperation seems like a victory for the species. But you have to look closer at the function and the boundaries of that cooperation.
How so?
Well, intelligence allowed early humans to navigate complex social dynamics, build alliances, and form cohesive tribes. But the biological purpose of those tribes was to secure individual and kin-based survival benefits.
And crucially, securing resources for your specific group almost always comes at a direct, often violent cost to competing groups of humans.
Right. The mechanism of cooperation was basically just a tool for localized competition.
Yes. The ultimate goal is still the survival of the individual and their close relatives who share their genes, not the flourishing of the entire human species.
The intelligence required to maintain a coalition is incredible, but it's deployed to outcompete your neighbors.
And the third researcher, Geher, pulls into the critique, takes this intra-species competition to an even more specific level. Marianne Fisher compiled a broad array of research in 2017, focusing heavily on female human intelligence.
Yeah, Fisher's work demonstrates that human females evolved specialized forms of social intelligence that function specifically to denigrate other women.
So we are talking about complex social maneuvering, reputation destruction, the spread of rumors, that kind of psychological warfare. How does that actually translate into an evolutionary advantage?
It all comes down to relative mate value. In a highly social species, reputation is a tangible currency.
Right.
If an individual can use their specialized intelligence to subtly damage a rival's reputation, they lower that rival's perceived value in the mating pool.
Oh, I see. This artificially inflates the attacker's relative standing, giving them privileged access to mates who hold the highest level of resources.
Which means their offspring get better food, better protection, and have a statistically higher chance of surviving to pass on those same manipulative genes.
The mechanism is flawless from a genetic standpoint. But again, it is a highly complex, intelligent behavior that evolved purely for individual advantage against members of the exact same species.
Okay, so the biological math here is completely dismantling the premise of page 349. Evolution does not pit species against species.
Adaptations simply do not develop to help one species dominate an ecosystem.
We have established the scientific consensus, but Geher goes a step further in his critique. He doesn't just want his students or his readers to take his word for it.
Right. To really cement why for the good of the species trait cannot practically exist in nature, he outlines this logical simulation he runs with his college classes.
I love this part because it removes the abstract theory and forces you to stare directly at the mechanics of survival.
Okay, picture a parent generation of an organism. It can be any organism you want. And in this generation, there are two distinct genetic variants living side by side.
Variant A possesses genes that bias the organism toward entirely self-serving behavior,
while variant B possesses genes that facilitate a strong tendency to act primarily for the good of the species.
So we start this simulation with a perfectly even split. Half the population is self-serving and half is species-serving. The question posed to the students is simple. Which genetic variant will be more prevalent in the subsequent generation?
Add a little bit of environmental pressure to the simulation, say a severe drought or a massive reduction in available food, and it doesn't take long to predict the outcome.
No, it really doesn't.
The organisms carrying variant B, the ones programmed to act for the species, will defer. They will step back from the limited food source to ensure the broader population survives.
But the individuals carrying variant A, the self-serving ones, they are going to ruthlessly take every calorie they can secure.
They won't share their food, they won't concede their territory.
If a predator arrives in the simulation, they might actively push the species-serving organism into its path to facilitate their own escape. Sort of like our penguins.
Exactly. Furthermore, the self-serving individuals are certainly not expending their daily energy trying to help their species-serving peers find mates.
They are dedicating 100% of their biological resources to their own survival and their own reproduction.
Which means, when the next generation is born, the population will skew heavily toward offspring carrying variant A.
And in the generation after that, the gap widens exponentially. As Geher's students quickly realize, within just a few brutal generations, the "for the species" variant is entirely bred out of existence.
It dies what the article calls a Darwinian death.
A Darwinian death. The mathematics of genetic replication simply do not support altruism on a species-wide level.
And when we pull out of the classroom simulation and look at the reality of human history, the evidence backing this up is everywhere.
If the underlying premise of that sci-fi dialogue was true, if our primary evolutionary function was truly to help humanity dominate the Earth together, as one unified team human civilization would look fundamentally different.
We wouldn't have centuries of warfare. We wouldn't have murder. We wouldn't have the endless human-on-human treachery, the political backstabbing, and the hoarding of resources that permeate literally every era of our recorded history.
The very existence of internal human conflict proves that we are not biologically programmed to prioritize the species over the individual.
We are, at our core, animals that evolved through the blind mechanical process of natural selection. And looking out for the best interests of a species as a whole is simply not what any organism is built to do at a biological level.
So why does understanding this distinction matter so much? Why are we dedicating an entire deep dive to unpacking a single line of dialogue in a sci-fi novel?
Yeah, does a biological slip-up in a work of fiction actually have real-world stakes?
Geher argues in his critique that it matters tremendously, because this specific misunderstanding isn't just mathematically incorrect, it is historically dangerous.
How so?
The concept of species vying for superiority over other species aligns almost perfectly with the foundational ideas of social Darwinism.
Ah, right. Historically, when people start applying this fallacious take on evolution to human society, this idea that evolution is a deliberate march toward a group or a species achieving ultimate dominance and superiority, it paves the way for some of the darkest chapters in human history.
It leads directly to the desire to build a superspecies. It justifies selective human breeding and eugenics.
The moment a society mistakenly believes that the goal of evolution is supremacy, that society opens the door to policing who gets to be a part of that supremacy.
Exactly. Now, we need to be incredibly clear on this point, and Geher emphasizes this forcefully in his critique. Andy Weir is absolutely not pushing a social Darwinist agenda in Project Hail Mary.
Oh, not at all. That is not the text or the subtext of the book.
Not even a little bit. It is a thrilling, imaginative narrative, and Weir's intent is clearly just to tell a fantastic story utilizing incredibly complex orbital physics and chemistry.
But the historical link between that specific biological fallacy and real-world harm still exists, and that is why it is so crucial for you as the listener to recognize it.
Right. When you are consuming media, even meticulously researched hard sci-fi that gets all the atmospheric pressure calculations perfectly right, it pays to understand the fundamental mechanics of human nature.
Understanding the true nature of evolution basically serves as a mental filter. Recognizing the stark difference between our actual individual evolutionary drives and these grand, fabricated species-level myths prevents us from passively absorbing narratives that are scientifically flawed.
It transforms you from a passive consumer of information into an active one. You can love the story, you can enjoy the ride of a blockbuster novel, but you keep your own scientific compass calibrated.
Knowledge is always most valuable when it provides a clearer lens through which to view the world. And understanding our own biological history is perhaps the clearest lens we have.
Which leaves us with a final, deeply provocative puzzle that the source material briefly touches on. Something for you to mull over as you go about your day.
Oh, I love this part.
We've spent this deep dive detailing the mechanics of our primal origins, establishing that our biological hardware was shaped entirely by a ruthless, self-serving process of individual selection.
We are the descendants of the variants that took the food and pushed their peers into the freezing water.
Exactly. We are the undisputed winners of a billion-year selfish genetic lottery. Yet the article notes a profound anomaly.
What's the anomaly?
Despite these primal origins, humans uniquely possess the capacity to understand those very origins. We possess the capacity to study our own biology, and uniquely, we possess the capacity for morality.
We can look at the brutal mathematics of evolution and recognize that it is brutal. We can feel empathy. We can choose to build structures that protect the vulnerable, basically defying the logic of variant A.
This raises the ultimate question. If our biological hardware is entirely driven by selfish individual advantage, yet we possess this profound capacity to value morality. Wait, I shouldn't say it like that. Does true human intelligence actually lie in our ability to consciously rebel against our own evolutionary programming?
Wow. To understand exactly what our genes demand we do and willfully choose to do the opposite.
Yeah.
It brings us right back to our craving for precision. We want the clean, jagged white line on the X-ray. We want the mathematical certainty of a spaceship's trajectory.
But the biology of who we are is messy. It's selfish, and it is entirely individualistic.
Yet the fact that we can look at that biological mess and choose to be better, maybe that conscious rebellion is the most fascinating adaptation of all.